It's Bob Cooney, but you knew that. This is episode 6 of the Being Virtual show. At some point, it's like when you have a baby, and you count first it's weeks old, and then it's months old, and then it's years old, and eventually you forget how old your kids are. At some point, I'll probably start counting and announcing the episodes, but every week is a new week, and it's exciting. And I'm so glad you're joining us today. So thanks. Make sure that if you're chatting, we're streaming live to Facebook and to Twitter through Periscope and to Twitch. And so make sure that send us your comments, send us your questions. And when you do that, especially if you're coming from the Facebook mentoring group, put your name in the comments so we know who you are, because some of this tech is still bleeding edge and it's not quite perfect yet. But we're still experimenting with new tech and new platforms, and we'll be experimenting with VR a lot in the coming weeks. So we'll talk about that in the future. So thanks for being here. And like and share this shit, man. This is a lot of work. We want an audience. We want to get the message out there. We want to build a community. Be like this guy. He's happy. He's sharing everything. So maybe someday we'll be sharing this in Fortnight. We'll be talking about that later this morning. And so this show is really about the metaverse, and Silicon Valley is in this race to build the metaverse, and we're going to talk about that. But first, there's a lot of news going on in the world of XR, and so let's get into that. Now, back in February on the website Road to VR, it's a great VR news website. Highly recommend you check them out if you haven't already. Tipatat, who is one of the founders of the Venture Reality Fund and who's been investing in virtual reality companies, startups, really early stage. Well, he was doing it when I met him in, I think, 2014 or 2015. And so he published an article in Road to VR talking about VR hitting its inflection point. And what he did was he correlated the number of reviews on websites for VR games with the revenue that ultimately was released for those games. And he showed an inflection point in 2019 where it just started cranking up to the right. And then what he did is he looked at how many games had generated over $1 million in revenue. And he's postulated that you need a platform with multiple games doing at least $1 million, especially if they're indie games, which have lower budgets, to have a viable platform. And you can see from this chart how now we're up over 100 titles that have generated over $1 million in revenue, and it's growing. Now, he also had a chart of all the games, the top games on there, and noted that these games, the top earning games, were almost all native VR titles. They were not ports of PC 2D games that people were bringing into VR, but VR really requires a new way of thinking and a new way of doing things. And lately I've been watching a lot of stuff happening in VR, and what I'm seeing is people taking old ways of doing things and bringing them into VR, and it just doesn't work. I had a conversation with Terry Schussler and Alan Smithson recently, and they were talking about needing a virtual keyboard in virtual reality, and I pushed back on that. Like, let's let go of virtual keyboards. And I think some of the ways we do things in games, and we talked about last week, we talked about AAA games and how the new control mechanisms are letting go of the old controllers. And it's kind of like Web 1.0. I'm old enough to remember Web 1.0, which was basically companies taking their brochures and putting them onto websites. Now, if you did that, people would laugh at you because there's a new way of interacting around the web. And I think VR requires that. Now, the other thing that's happening, and this was just released last week on Road to VR, is they look at headset adoption. And they're taking the Steam VR numbers that publish how many headsets are active on Steam. And we saw a massive spike that they're attributing to Half-Life Alyx, with almost 1 million headsets added to Steam. Now, platforms need a network effect. In this case, you need headsets and hardware for people to play things on, and you need content. And there's been this narrative in the virtual reality world that we need a killer app. But in essence, what we really need is we need a bunch of content that hits a bunch of different micro verticals and a lot of different use cases for a big audience, because we all want to do different things. And that combination of content leading to people buying hardware and hardware leading to people using content, which drives revenue for developers to create more content, which means more people are going to buy hardware, is actually starting to happen now. And you're seeing it. If you go try to buy a headset, good luck. I just ordered a Valve Index, and they wouldn't even take my money because they're saying we're at least 8 weeks out. Oculus Quest is sold out on all platforms. You can't even find them on eBay now. And so VR is really starting to explode. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in the future. Now, speaking of hardware, there's a Kickstarter going on right now. It's got about 2 days left, and it's the ET controller. And what these guys have done is they've taken what I think the knuckle controllers from Valve have done. They've removed the buttons, and they've created this really intuitive touch controller for virtual reality. Now, if any of you have ever been in the hardware business like I have, hardware is hard and it's expensive. Now, these guys are selling this for about $320 American. They've raised about, I want to say about 80 grand so far, which isn't a lot of money for a hardware startup, but they've already got developer kits. The developer kits are in the wild. The final product is going to sell for, I think, again, $300, and it'll be integrated with Lighthouse. And so I think you should check that out. Now, with any Kickstarter, there's risk involved, especially with a hardware startup. And so this is not an endorsement. I have ordered a set of these. I can afford to lose $300 if it happens. So be really mindful that Kickstarter is not a guarantee that the product is actually going to make it into the wild. Now, another thing that hit the interwebs last week was Sony Interactive Entertainment from their research labs showed a new controller that they're working on, which looks remarkably like the knuckle controller from Valve Index. And I think this is further evidence that PS5 distribution pipeline is getting laid. Now, PSVR is actually the biggest player in the VR industry. They've sold more than 5 million headsets, and they've done it rather quietly. You don't hear them out there bragging about it or talking about it, but it's actually driven a lot of use in VR. Now, one of the reasons that people dismiss it is because it's generally cheap, it's low quality, it's less than $200. But my expectation is that PSVR is clearly going to support, PlayStation 5 is clearly going to support PSVR, and you'll see a new headset coming from PlayStation probably in 2021. Now, also, Oculus announced that they're working on a new headset, a follow-up to the Quest. Now, that's not really a surprise because every hardware company in the world that's in the technology business is constantly working on upgrades. But it was good to see confirmation. And because of supply chain challenges and the coronavirus, most people expect that headset to come out in 2021 as well. And you can expect it to be lighter, faster, probably not cheaper. They'll probably hold that price point in the $400 range. Now, other stuff that's happening, virtual searches are exploding. People are searching for everything virtual. Virtual happy hour game searches are up 4,600%. Virtual museum tour searches are up 3,600%. Virtual zoo tours are up 2,200%. Virtual field trips for kids up 2,200%. Recently, there's a company called Camp that's doing a free virtual birthday party every day at 5 p.m. Eastern time for kids. And you can log in with Zoom, and they host a birthday party for people who can't have birthday parties and go to their local trampoline park or amusement center. They also offer private parties if you want to pay. Now, there are other companies in the VR arcade business that are creating new models around hardware rentals to do parties during the shutdown. So VR arcade 2-hour parties from VR Zone DC, they'll actually hand deliver up to 8 headsets to different people in different locations. And they offer a curated game experience with a virtual host that walks you through how to play party games in VR. Now, another company in Philadelphia called Virtual Reality for Rent is mailing out Oculus Quest headsets via UPS. And so for $300, you get a Quest for 3 days with 20 games. And you get to play, and you ship it back via UPS. And so we're starting to see new models around VR headsets in the rental business. Now, for those of you that are old like me, you might remember we could go to Blockbuster or even the grocery store and rent VCRs. VCRs in the early days were, around $1,000, and not everybody had them. And so you could rent a VCR and rent a couple of movies and keep it at home for a few days and have a movie night. That actually went on to home video consoles. And you could actually rent consoles if you didn't have it because they were expensive. The Xbox was, $500 when it first came out. And then you could rent some video games and keep them. Now, this actually led to a lawsuit in 1989 between Nintendo and Blockbuster, which Blockbuster won the first round. Nintendo then sued them for copying their manuals for copyright infringement. And so people have asked me, as I've posted some of this stuff on Facebook in my group, they've asked me if around the licensing of this, and this isn't by no way an endorsement saying that you can rent hardware, consumer hardware for commercial purposes and make money off of it. But the models have been around for a long time. And so your mileage may vary in that world. Now, there's another term that's come out. Everybody's gone into Zoom, and we've talked about Zoom meetings and goats on Zoom meetings and Zoom backgrounds. Well, there's a new term now that's been coined called Zoom fatigue. And what it does is it's happening because we're in so many Zoom meetings and our bodies, our brains aren't wired to cognitively process the images and the things that we're doing on Zoom. And so we're scanning lots of faces. We're not seeing the nuance of facial and body language, which is how we read a situation. We normally don't stare at faces in real life. When you're in a meeting and you're talking to somebody, we avert our gaze, we look around, we roll our eyes, we kind of look around. We don't just stare at somebody in the face because it's creepy. Right? It's creepy. Don't do that. We need to perform. We need to have exaggerated movements, and you're on a little teeny screen in Zoom. And so Zoom fatigue is a thing. And Zoom meetings, and that's only a month in, right? And so people are thinking Zoom is the panacea for remote work, remote collaboration. It's not. We need better tools. And one of those tools clearly is going to be virtual reality. Now, Loom.ai is doing avatars that use voice recognition to hold, and it holds the camera. Your avatar holds the camera gaze. It's not using facial recognition, though they use facial recognition to create your avatar, so it looks like you. But it uses voice recognition, and your avatar holds the camera gaze, so you can be off doing whatever you want during your meeting. You're going to see more and more and more of that technology come out to help make this remote work possible. And I did an interview with Doug Griffin, who's the head of business development for Loom.ai, and we'll be doing that next week on the show. Now, in some sad news, Magic Leap has laid off 1,000 people, half their staff. And they said they're moving away from consumer markets where they had no traction whatsoever, and they're going to focus on the medical market, and they're seeking a $100 million investment, which actually is kind of mice nuts compared to how much money they've raised, which is what I think was like $3 billion to date. And so I think this is an existential moment for Magic Leap. And the good news for those of you that are in the XR space is there's some amazing talent on the market. And I highly recommend you be out there networking. If you need to reach some of those people, just hit me up on LinkedIn and I can connect you to some of them that I know. I know Charlie Fink here, who you're seeing showing off his Magic Leap glasses, probably knows a lot of them. He's on Twitter at Charlie Fink. But there's some really good people out there and some really great talent. And there's a lot of haters about Magic Leap that were kind of hoping they would fail. And I don't get that. I mean, I kind of get it. People hate to see other people's success because their failure makes them feel better about their own situation. And that's just bullshit. And one of the things I want to recommend that everybody that worked for Magic Leap watch is this General Magic documentary. And anybody in Silicon Valley or in a startup needs to watch this movie. General Magic was the most important company to come out of Silicon Valley that nobody ever heard of. And that's what they say. And one of the great quotes I love about the movie is, failure isn't the end, it's actually the beginning. And I predict that in 20 years, when they're making the documentary of the Metaverse, we'll be seeing it featuring a whole bunch of people that worked at Magic Leap because they were inventing new technology that didn't even exist. And that's really hard and it's really expensive. And if it wasn't for people like the guys at Magic Leap driving us forward, I wouldn't be coming to you now through live streaming on a Mac with an iPad teleprompter talking through a fucking BlueBerry high-end microphone that I could slip in my pocket that was $200. So kudos to everybody at Magic Leap, and we all wish you the best of luck. Now, in the beginning was the command line. Now, some of you might recognize that as the opening line from Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, where a computer hacker, who is also a pizza delivery driver, was going into a virtual world and becoming a warrior prince trying to solve the puzzle of a virus. Pizza computers, and viruses. That sounds like a summary of my life these days. Now, there's been a lot of writing recently. The Washington Post just wrote an article about Silicon Valley is racing to build the next version of the internet, and it's called the Metaverse. And for those of you that aren't aware of the concept of the Metaverse, it's this constant on shared virtual space. It's persistent, it's cross-platform, which means you can access it from anywhere. It extends into the real world. It's got no limits on people. You can drop in, you can drop out, and it has real economy with jobs and shopping and media. There have been some versions of that. Second Life is the one that most people hold to. But that was really a niche product for a niche market. And there have been games, Fortnite, which we're going to talk about, World of Warcraft, who have created these persistent, always-on worlds, but they're not quite persistent, and they're not scalable. You can only have like 100 people on a server in Fortnite, for example. Now, one company that's trying to build the metaverse is Facebook. Naturally, they want to have 1 billion people in virtual reality, and they have a new product called Horizons. And it's in a beta, and it should be launching any day now for the beta testers. And it's only going to be available for Quest and Rift to begin with. And one of the amazing things is they're creating world builder tools for collaboration. So people without software programming skills like me, or creative skills like me, can create their own experiences. And you can do that with your friends. You'll be able to create, one of the demos they show is a laser tag game. So I could get on here with Gordo from Laserstorm and Jim Kessler from Lasertron, and we could create the most amazing virtual laser tag arena in Facebook Horizons and open it up for the world. Now, it's built on Unity, which is one of the two big game development platforms that seem to be dominating it. But they're trying to democratize Unity and make it in a way that anybody can use it. And so it's going to be really fascinating to see what Facebook does with Horizons. Now, Mozilla is also jumping into the metaverse game with Mozilla Hubs. Now, for those of you that don't know, Mozilla is the company that brings you the not-for-profit web. They say, it's people over profit. They tend to do things on an open source basis. They're the company that brought us Firefox, and they're building the metaverse. And they say the metaverse needs to be built on the web. They're saying all of these other things are built on the internet, but they want to build the metaverse on the web. Now, my personal opinion of this is I don't see how it happens. I feel like this is another example of old paradigm thinking coming into a new paradigm world. And it's like with Web 1.0, taking brochures and trying to bring them online. I actually don't think Mozilla is on the right track, but we're going to watch them. And as always, I hope they're successful with whatever they do. Now, Fortnite is the closest thing that I think we've seen to a metaverse. Now, Fortnite has been exploding. Superdata suggests that they did $1.8 billion in revenue in 2019. Fortnite recently came up and said they're full of shit. Superdata doesn't know what they're talking about, and that they're way off. And my guess is that Superdata is massively underestimating the revenue of Fortnite. Now, because Fortnite is crossing over to all kinds of things. So last year, we saw the Avengers movie and Thanos mode brought to Fortnite to promote Avengers Endgame. We also saw the big Star Wars reveal in Fortnite, where the Emperor revealed himself and they gave everybody lightsabers, and all of a sudden lightsabers was a weapon, and you had, different Star Wars characters that you could become in Fortnite. And it's not just movies. Last year, the biggest music event of the year was Marshmello doing a live concert from stage in Fortnite. 10 million people live showed up in-game, 27 million more views on Twitch, and who knows how many hundreds of millions of views on various platforms like YouTube. Now, this year, the biggest media event of the year, in my opinion, was Travis Scott's Fortnite concert. Right? Marshmello was a one-time event. Travis Scott did 5 versions of his astronomical event across 5 different time zones, so everybody around the world could participate live. And I know that some people did it multiple times because it was so phenomenal. Now, as social media exploded, attendance grew for each event too. And this is the future of virtual event marketing. Used to be you would launch an event, and then the minute that event started, you started promoting next year's event. one of the things that I see in my show is that the further on we go in the show, the higher the attendance goes because people see it, people share it. You did remember to share and like, right? And then other people see it and they jump in. And so Travis Scott and Fortnite changed the way we're going to see events and that we're going to promote events. Now, he used this to launch a new apparel line and a new track with Kid Cudi called The Scotts. So music companies are getting into this and seeing the opportunity to create all new events. Now, one of the challenges with Fortnite and events was highlighted by Andrew Webster for The Verge, who wrote, at the end of the Fortnite concert, it was very jarring to finish watching Travis Scott, only immediately dropped into a bloodbath. And one of the reasons that I struggle with Fortnite is I hung up my controller 10 years ago when my kids got better at Halo than I was. And I just kind of stopped playing first-person shooter games. So what Fortnite did is they created Party Royale because not everybody wants to battle. Now they're going to celebrate 350 million players in Fortnite later tonight, your time, later this morning, my time. I'll be jumping into Party Royale on Fortnite. I want you to join me there. And we're going to be checking out all the things that you can do, shooting plungers at people instead of killing them and making them wait to respawn for 15 minutes. Now, Tim Sweeney is the CEO of Epic, which makes Fortnite and Unreal Engine upon which Fortnite is built. Now, he was quoted in a CNBC article where he predicted enterprise users of Unreal would overtake game users by the end of 2019. And industry-specific and entertainment uses will converge as part of a bigger digital industry. He said, the thing that really interests me is seeing visual assets cross over between different media, giving us an example of a model creating to use an architectural firm that could be dropped into an entertainment experience. Now, an example of that is Star Wars Mandalorian. Now, Jon Favreau is changing the way movies are made. He's the guy that did The Lion King in virtual reality from a production standpoint. And now he's using virtual sets with giant LED screens and these environments built in Unreal Engine to make the realism higher than green screen and chroma key. And the cost is actually lower and production is faster. And it's fascinating how Unreal is penetrating all of these entertainment markets. Now, so what's it all mean? There are 7 million developers using Unreal Engine. Hollywood movies are using it to make more reliable, more believable movies and make them more affordable. Architects are designing buildings in it and using it for virtual walkthroughs. Sony Music is now hiring a team to work on the intersection of games and music in Unreal Engine. They've just posted want ads for Unreal developers, including game level designers. Now, this is Sony Music, mind you. Soon, the entire creative world would be working in Unreal. And one key concept of the metaverse is the connection between the virtual and the physical, right? And so architects building buildings in Unreal that wind up in these virtual worlds. Now, Fortnite won't be the metaverse. It's a proof of concept. It'll be one land in a metaverse. And Epic will create the hooks to tie in all of these virtual worlds that all of these creatives are building together. Just in the last year, we've seen VR games from Respawn making the new Medal of Honor game for Oculus, nDreams doing Phantom Covert Ops. Check out my interview last week on that game. ILM X Labs Vader Immortal, as well as multi-platform games like Gears of War 5, Borderlands 3, Ace Combat 7, and the remake of System Shock, all built in Unreal Engine 4. And so imagine one metaverse where you can move seamlessly from game to game, world to world, story to story, building to building, and integrating Hollywood and music and gaming and even architecture. Now you weave in retail and work and education, and you have the metaverse. Now, does that sound familiar? Now, I'm not saying Epic is going to win the battle to build the metaverse, or that there'll even be one winner in that fight. There very well could be multiple metaverses, and maybe eventually they'll all connect. Or maybe they'll all be acquired by Facebook, who's acquired Instagram and WhatsApp and Oculus, and trying to turn those into one giant megaverse. They even tried to buy Unity last year, as was disclosed by Blake Harris in his book, The History of the Future. Now, with a $15 billion valuation for Unreal, rumored, and Facebook's $600 billion valuation and $50 billion in cash and printing more every day, they could easily afford to acquire Unreal. It's going to be fascinating to watch and to play. And speaking of playing, don't forget Party Island later today or tonight, wherever you are. Now, coming up on Tuesday, I've got a very special show. We're going to be interviewing 4 of the leading investors in the XR market. And so if you're thinking about raising money anytime in the future, if you know somebody thinking about raising money, or you're thinking about investing in this space as a venture investor or an angel investor, check it out. You can actually go to the website beingvirtual.tv, and I've put some reminder buttons on there that you can click, and it'll open up a calendar item so you can be reminded in your calendar so you don't miss this one. And then next week, we're going to be talking about VR fitness. I was going to do that this week, but we got some amazing interviews lined up, and I didn't want to rush it. So I thought I would wait and bring you hopefully a better story next week on VR fitness. And maybe I'll lose a couple more kilograms between now and then. We're also going to have more on avatars with Doug Griffin and Loom.ai. And we're going to talk about the impact on the planet that our move to virtual is having. I spoke with the head of virtual reality for KLM Airlines this week. And it was fascinating. Now we have a question about, what will the metaverse have common with crypto? I think I had a conversation with Doug Griffin about this notion, and I think where blockchain comes in, and I think crypto is an implementation of blockchain. And blockchain is really the underlying technology that's going to be changing things. Cryptocurrencies are very speculative right now, and I think you're fighting an institution of governments governments are there to control. That's why they exist. And they're not going to let go of currency control. And having a cryptocurrency that isn't backed by a nation state, I think, is probably going to be difficult for that to take hold and get the confidence of the common person. And the volatility is going to have to go out of that, because right now you might as well just buy Bitcoin, go to the craps table in Vegas if it was open. It's almost the same thing. But the underlying technology of cryptocurrency is blockchain. And blockchain is actually going to be a bigger game changer than the internet was. It's going to unlock trillions of dollars of capital in emerging worlds where they don't have the ability to track ownership. There's a great Bill Tai, follow him on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you can find him, is one of the leading thinkers in cryptocurrency and blockchain. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about this in the future, but I think the place we're going to see blockchain come is in avatar protection. One of the challenges and the risks that we have as avatars get better and you have these deep fakes, how do I know that how do you know that my avatar is actually me? And there's going to have to be some kind of a blockchain ownership and verification system that when I show up, it's me. And I expect to see some emerging technology and solutions coming out on that this year. And if you're in that space, hit me up, drop me an email in vrbob@bobcooney.com, or find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, vrbob1, and let me know what you're doing, because I'm really fascinated on that space. Do we have any other questions? I want to call out Kylie Savage, my producer, who's sitting here on my left, running the console and managing all of this and creating a lot of the content that we're doing. And it's a lot of work putting this show together, and we're up till 10:30 last night getting the trailer, the actual credits, which we're going to go into here in a second, going, which is a new thing. We want to make sure we give credit and give attribution to everybody that's contributing to the making of this show, whether they know they're contributing or not. And there's a lot of people out there doing amazing work, and I'm out there trying to find them and bring them to you in a format where you might not be seeing them. And so do we have any other questions? All right, so make sure you show up on Tuesday. And I'm going to say goodbye and say stay on the show for another couple of minutes, because I'm going to introduce you to the Tam Slam as we head out. And we'll see you Tuesday in the Americas and Europe, Wednesday in Australia and Asia with the investor conference. And
you can chat with them online.
And you can chat with them online. Bring your questions. The chat will be live on Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. So we'll see you Tuesday. And I don't know what she's saying. She's giving me some kind of signals.
You can talk now.
And I can talk now, except your iPad locked me out, and I don't know the code.
Okay.
So I can't talk now. We'll see you Tuesday. Watch the Tam Slam. I love you all. Peace. So one of the things that I love to do is experience cultures through food. Now that I'm kind of locked down in Australia, there are some really unique food things here, and I wanted to share one of my favorites with you. Now, no, it's not kangabangas, which are made from kangaroo meat, and they're hot dogs. They're actually okay. But it's actually a cookie, or I think they'd call them biscuits here, called Tim Tams. And they look like this. This is a caramel one. Tim Tams are legendary in Australia. Not necessarily just because they're fucking delicious, but it's the way they eat them. They have a thing called the Tam Slam. So you bite off the corner on one side, then you bite off the opposing corner. And then what you do is you suck the tea through the cookie, and it gets all gooey inside, and then you eat it, and it's amazing. And I'm going to show you. If you're squeamish, you might want to look away. It's a bit messy. So that's it. That's the Tam Slam. Now, there are certain grocers in America, by the way, that are starting to carry these. So keep an eye out for them. If you find them, let me know. Maybe do a video of your own Tam Slam and share it with us online. So anyway, cheers. So gooey. You have to be careful because they get really soft and they can drop in your tea. And so it's best to try to do the one bite